everyone. Thank you very much for coming tonight to our annual EFOM lecture, annual EFOM Missions Lecture. Maybe you don't know what EFOM means, but for the last 30 years here at Holy Cross, the Endowment Fund for Orthodox Missions, an endowment fund that came out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, the Annunciation Church, they've been sponsoring an annual missions lecture each year here at Holy Cross. It usually coincides with our Missions Week, and we try to bring different speakers to come on campus and to present to us some aspect of Orthodox missions. Over the last 2 years, over the last several years, 3 or 4 years, this annual EFOM lecture, we've put it under the auspices of the Missions Institute, and we've combined it with our Missions Week, and we've expanded it a little bit, where we've now started bringing speakers to spend a week on campus, interacting with the students, speaking in classes, and speaking in the chapel. So this past week, we've had our 2 guest speakers who have spoken in the chapel each night. They've spoken in, I think, around 10 classes, both in Holy Cross and Hellenic College. And then, of course, it culminates in their presentation tonight. I want to introduce both our speakers, Father John Chakos and Father Giron. Father John is well known to the school. He's a graduate of Holy Cross back in 1971? 1974. He graduated in 1974. He served as a parish priest in the Chicago area, and then since 1981, he's been serving as the pastor of Holy Cross Greek Orthodox Church in Mount Lebanon, Pennsylvania, which, if any of you have been up to Holy Cross, really for me, it's one of the most dynamic Orthodox churches in our archdiocese. It's a very vibrant church, very missions-minded church, a church that started its own school, or a pan-Orthodox school in the Pittsburgh area 10 years ago or so?
15 years.
15 years ago. So it's really a model parish for Orthodox churches in America. Father John has been serving there and serving capably, and is beloved in his parish. And Father John has always had a passion for missions. He and his wife, Presbytera Alexandra, they served in the Peace Corps in Rio de Janeiro for almost 3 years before they came here to Holy Cross. And from that time of serving among the poorest of the poor in Rio de Janeiro, he always had a passion about missions. So one of the ways he fulfilled that passion was serving on the board of our OCMC, Orthodox Christian Mission Center. He also became very active in getting his parish active in supporting all types of missions. His church was the home parish for many of the first Orthodox Christians of Indonesia. Father Daniel Bayantoro and the others who followed him found refuge at Holy Cross and found guidance under Father John. He then became very active in Guatemala at the Hogar, where his parish would go, and still goes every year, down to the Hogar, and interacted with the orphanage there. And Father John even ended up adopting one of the children. His 4th child is adopted from Guatemala. But all along, he's always got a passion for missions. I remember when I served as a missionary for 10 years in Albania, whenever I would tell Father John about what's happening in Albania, I could see a desire, a burning desire for Father John to get out into the mission field. And I'd always say, you need to come to Albania. I mean, I was a young priest in Albania, and I said, they don't need young priests, they need experienced priests with wisdom to come. And at one point in the middle of his pastoral career, he did take a sabbatical and go spend 6 months in Tanzania, where his son was a long-term missionary. So anyway, this is all leading up to this past year when Father John, at the age of 70, decided to retire from his parish, even though he could have stayed on much longer. But he retired with a purpose. He and his Presbytera retired with the purpose of dedicating their lives and their time now back to Guatemala. And he wanted to start helping our next speaker, Father Giron, in this very exciting new development of Orthodoxy in Guatemala. And I will say more about that, they're going to say more about that. So that's our first speaker, Father John. Father Andres Giron is a very well-known figure in Guatemala. If you've read his bio, it's a pretty impressive bio. He studied as a young man in Memphis, and during his time in the United States, he came into contact with Martin Luther King. He marched with Martin Luther King and was greatly inspired by Martin Luther King. He mentioned in one of the classes how he was a bit of a radical, a revolutionary, I should say, a revolutionary coming from Guatemala. And he said his encounter with Martin Luther King transformed him from a revolutionary, a possibly violent revolutionary, to a non-violent revolutionary. And he went back into Guatemala. He became this figure in Guatemala that spoke for the poor and tried to raise consciousness to the needs of the poor. He led this major March for Peace, which I hope he's going to talk about a little bit today, in the 1980s on behalf of the poor and underprivileged. In the late 80s, he ran as a candidate for the president of Guatemala. He didn't win, but he did become a senator in Guatemala. He served in the Senate for, I think, 5 or 6 years. During his time in the Senate, he helped to push for major land reforms, helping the aristocracy to give up land to the common person. And as a result of this land reform movement, he helped to establish 45 or so villages in Guatemala, among the Mayan people, getting the Mayan people to have their own land, creating these villages. So he was very active in the political sphere. He also served as the ambassador of Guatemala to the United Nations. But all the while he was doing this, he was also a Roman Catholic priest. And he was serving the Roman Catholic priest, but all of his movements led him into conflict with various figures in Guatemala, with the military leadership. 3 times people tried to assassinate him. One time he was serving the liturgy and was shot in the head. 3 times almost killed. He also came into conflict with the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church, which eventually led him to leave the Roman Catholic Church. And when he left, he didn't leave his priesthood. He continued to serve, but he began to serve the Mayan Indians, Mayan people, who also had felt abandoned and left the Roman Catholic Church. For the last 25 years, he's been the spiritual leader of the Mayan people. In fact, in his position among these churches, he was considered their bishop and the spiritual leader of the Mayan people. But Father Andres had a desire to lead this group of people into the historic church. And in 2010, he was received by the Ecumenical Patriarchate under Metropolitan Athena Gores of Mexico. So he came under the Ecumenical Patriarchate, and now he's an Orthodox priest, leading this very exciting movement into Orthodoxy. So I gave you a little brief introduction, but I wanted to just let you know it's a great privilege for us to have both Father John and Father Andres to be with us this past week. I know many of the students have been inspired by them, and to speak tonight and to give a fuller picture and a fuller view of this exciting story. I have to say, I've known Father John, he's been my spiritual father since the age of 19. And I've known Father John for many years, and I have to say that whenever he talks about Guatemala, it is one of the most exciting times I see Father John. He keeps telling me, Father Luke, you don't believe it. This is an exciting time. This is something that really is, I can't overstate what is happening in Albania. And he, of course, he keeps, in Guatemala. and he keeps raving about Father Andres. So, without any further introduction, thank you for coming, Father John and Father Andres.